From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about Bayview's 71 different lake captains that lived in Bayview, Wisconsin during the age of sail and steam between 1878 and 1968. This video, like all the others, is sponsored by the historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. Today I'm standing in front of the former home of Captain Roland Martin. Roland Martin is the son of another Bayview Lake captain, his father, Edward Martin, and there's another episode on him also on this channel. Now, Roland Martin, all he ever knew was going to sea. He's one of Bayview's greatest lake captains, but I could really say that about all of them. But he certainly was tremendous. He went to sea, lakes, At age 14, born in Michigan, I think it was 1905, over in Grand Haven. Spent a good part of his career over there, starting out as made bunks for the crewmen and scrubbed floors, bottom level. Then he became a regular crewman, then he became an officer, then he became a captain. And he mostly captained car ferries, especially when he lived in his house. One of the things that's really unique about him, and he's associated with the name of Milwaukee more than any other captain. He captained the car ferry City of Milwaukee, and he was a officer on the ship Milwaukee that sank in a storm in, I think it was 1930. He left the month before it sank, and then he was called in to identify the bodies of people, and even found part of his cabin that had drifted ashore. He has another connection in Milwaukee in that he became the superintendent of all of the Grand Trunk car ferries. He had headquartered, his offices were here in Milwaukee while he lived in his house. So during that time there were other Milwaukee lake captains captaining car ferries for Grand Trunk, and they would have worked for him. So started out the very bottom level, worked his way all the way up to become the superintendent of Grand Trunk, and then he was elevated to another position above that in Grand Trunk, but it was back in Grand Haven in Michigan, where he was born, and so he moved back there. He lived in his house about 23 years. So stand by for the specifics coming from Simon Stanhope. Lots of more details I didn't get to cover here, so please stay with us. Coming up next, and with that I'll say hats off to our Bayview Lake captains. Have a nice day. Late September, the sun's shining at 70. You can't beat it. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today we will be discussing the life of Captain Roland J. Martin, whose Great Lakes sailing career began at age 14 and totaled 42 at sea and another 14 as the Superintendent of Grand Trunk Railroad's car ferry fleet. His father, Edward Martin, captained the lake's largest passenger ships, and for a short time also captained a car ferry while he lived in Bayview, on South Ellen Street, being named Flag Captain of the Grand Trunk Fleet, at the conclusion of his sailing career in 1937. Early in his career, Roland Martin served as a junior officer on the car ferry Milwaukee, only by miracle departing from it for another ship just 1 month before the Milwaukee sank in a storm, with the loss of all hands, in October 1929. Roland Martin lived for 23 years on Bayview's South California Street, captaining a car ferry for Grand Trunk for 21 of those 23 years. Of all of Bayview's 71 different lake captains, Roland Martin has the namesake Milwaukee associated with his maritime career more frequently than any other, ranging from him not only living here, but also from the different ships he served on that had that name. Finally, Captain Martin's longest command, and the ship he also captained for 18 years, while living in Bayview, is today the only ship in existence that was once captained by at least 2 and likely 3 different Bayview lake captains. It is perfectly preserved in its original condition, and is opened for tours each summer in northern Michigan. Captain Roland J. Martin was born in Grand Haven, Michigan, in 1905. His father, Edward, was captain of the Great Lakes passenger ship Tionesta at the time. He had one brother, Clint, who also became a ship's officer on the Great Lakes. In 1919, at age 14, Roland began his 42-year career sailing the Great Lakes by taking a job aboard an unknown ship as a dishwasher and bunk maker. Then, at age 17, having only completed 1 year of high school, he took a job with the Grand Trunk Railroad's Marine Department as a deckhand in 1922, moving up to a watchman in 1923. These were his early jobs in a career as a Great Lakes sailor and captain that would consume his entire life. Roland continued advancing up the career path in Grand Trunk car ferries, procuring officer licenses as he went along. During this time he continued to live in Grand Haven, Michigan. This is just 10 miles south of Muskegon, which was the port of call for Grand Trunk's car ferries, sailing out of Milwaukee, and where the Grand Trunk Railroad's Marine Department was headquartered. It was during this time of his expanding career that he was to have an uncanny, unique, and almost legendary personal connection with anything maritime associated with the name Milwaukee. This namesake connection was far beyond any other Bayview Lake captain, and probably any other Milwaukee or even Great Lakes captain anywhere. It began in 1929, when he was temporary mate on the car ferry Milwaukee, and departed the ship just 1 month before it sank in a storm on 22nd October 1929, with all 47 crewmen lost. He was tasked with identifying bodies as they washed ashore. During one such identification session, he noticed, near one of the bodies, that an interior cabin wall had also washed ashore on the beach. When he went over to look at it, he immediately identified it as having come from his very own cabin when he was serving aboard. His reason for having left the Milwaukee was to take a similar junior officer position on the car ferry Grand Haven. In fact, he had been aboard the Grand Haven during the exact same storm that sank the Milwaukee. He reported the storm was so severe it threw waves over the sea gate on the Grand Haven's stern, subsequently believed to have been what caused the Milwaukee to sink. Martin also said the Grand Haven rolled so severely in that particular storm that huge, heavy steel grates from amidships were thrown up into the air with such force that they went up, out, and away from the ship, landing directly into Lake Michigan, without ever having touched any part of the ship on the way down. 2 other Bayview sailors also served on the Milwaukee prior to and during its sinking. Future Bayview Lake Captain Albert C. Newmeyer of East Lincoln Avenue, likely a crewman aboard, but departed before it sank, and watchman Frank Welter of Beecher Street, who drowned when the Milwaukee went down. Fellow Bayview Lake Captain Colin Carlyle also sailed through this same storm aboard the steamship Albert H. Gary, later discovering a life jacket from the water with the ship's name Milwaukee stenciled on it. The second connection Captain Roland Martin had with the namesake Milwaukee was when he became captain of the car ferry City of Milwaukee in 1938. This ship was the namesake replacement to the sunken Milwaukee. He took command while living in Bayview, which is technically part of, wait for it, Milwaukee. He remained captain of the City of Milwaukee for 18 years. It still exists today as a museum ship in Manistee, Michigan. And finally, the third connection of Captain Martin with the namesake Milwaukee came in 1963, when the wreck of the sunken car ferry Milwaukee was discovered. It was none other than Roland Martin that announced its discovery to the press, in his capacity as Grand Trunk's terminal and car ferry superintendent, that was headquartered in, you guessed it, Milwaukee. These Milwaukee name connections with Roland Martin are amazing and, as mentioned previously, unique among Bayview's 71 different lake captains. It's a very interesting part of Bayview's outstanding maritime history. Returning now to Captain Martin's career path discussion, as mentioned, he continued serving as a junior officer on the Grand Haven, and did so for 2 years, from 1929 to 1930. Then moved on to become first mate on the car ferry Grand Rapids, from 1931 to 1936. Towards the end of his 5-year stint as the first mate of the Grand Rapids, 1935 to be exact, Captain Martin moved with his wife and family from Grand Haven, Michigan, across Lake Michigan to 3137 South California Street in Bayview. The reason for this move was most likely due to a change in home porting of the Grand Rapids from Grand Haven, Michigan to Milwaukee. It was right after he moved to Bayview that he had an interesting sailing adventure while being first mate on the car ferry Grand Rapids. The ship got stuck in the ice in 1936, the only recorded time the lakes were completely frozen over since 1918, according to his veteran lake captain father, Edward Martin. The ice began to put the Grand Rapids into a list, so the ship's boilers were extinguished so they wouldn't explode. First mate Roland Martin was tasked by the ship's captain to assemble the crew into groups of 4 to abandon ship and walk over the solid ice for 20 miles to the nearest point of land. Just as the crew was about to disembark the Grand Rapids, the icebreaker Escanaba arrived and cut a huge circle around the Grand Rapids to relieve the ice pressure on its hull. The tactic worked, and the Grand Rapids was freed, and was able to make it through the remaining ice to safely reach the shore. It's notable that Captain Martin ended up going legally blind in one eye, with the other damaged, from the years of sailing across Lake Michigan with bright sun shining across the ice. He recalled in a later interview, after he retired, that sunglasses were not available then, like they are now, and the years of staring out into the glaring sunlit ice damaged both of his retinas. 2 years after his arrival in Bayview, Roland Martin became a lake captain for the first time in 1937, the ship being the car ferry Grand Haven, which he had previously served aboard as mate during the terrible storm in 1929 that sank the car ferry Milwaukee. As a result of his promotion to captain of the Grand Haven in 1937, Roland became the youngest car ferry captain on the Great Lakes for that year at age 32. At the same time, his brother Clint became second mate on the car ferry City of Milwaukee. This made them the 2 youngest officers in the car ferry service in 1937. Note, there will be a future episode on this channel about Captain Roland Martin's brother Clint Martin on a different subject, titled An Evolutionary Event in Maritime Safety. It's very notable here that, as a real indicator of the dangers of sailing the Great Lakes at that time, before radar, GPS, U.S. Coast Guard rescue helicopters, and other improved safety measures that exist today, it was Grand Trunk's policy to prohibit relatives that worked for the company from sailing together on the same ship. The next year, 1938, Roland Martin became captain of the car ferry City of Milwaukee, and would remain so for the next 18 years, from 1938 to 1956. This was to be not only his final command, but his final time actually sailing the lakes, which totaled 42 years. However, even though he was no longer actually sailing ships, he continued on as a senior manager in the shipping business. In 1956, straight from being captain of the car ferry City of Milwaukee, Roland Martin became the Marine Superintendent for Grand Trunk's Lake Michigan car ferries, its offices headquartered in Milwaukee. This meant he was now the boss for all of Grand Trunk's car ferries and their captains, that included 2 fellow Bayview Lake captains, Otmar Janke of Winchester Street and Albert Neumeyer of East Lincoln Avenue. 2 years after this, in 1958, he was promoted again by Grand Trunk, this time to Superintendent of Terminals and Car Ferry Operations, between Milwaukee and Muskegon, which by then had headquarters in both Milwaukee and Muskegon. This promotion made him the top officer in charge of all Grand Trunk car ferry operations across Lake Michigan. Quite an achievement and honour for a sailor that started out 40 years earlier as a dishwasher and bunk maker aboard ship at age 14. A few days after his appointment had been announced, Captain Martin appeared on a local television weeknight show, Face the Spotlight, at 10:15 p.m. Just to add some flavour for the time in those very early days of television in 1958, other shows that appeared that evening were The Rosemary Clooney Show, highlighted as being in colour, Jane Wyman Theatre, The Night Owl Theatre, and Wrestling, featuring Vern Gagne versus Gypsy Joe. With his new promotion came responsibility for not only the Milwaukee office, but also the second headquarters operating out of Muskegon. This gave him the chance to pick one of these two locations to live, and he chose Muskegon and his native Michigan home and roots. He had lived in Bayview for 23 years, captaining the car ferry City of Milwaukee for 21 of those 23 years, and the car ferry Grand Haven for 1. He remained in this superintendent position with Grand Trunk for the next 12 years, through 1970, finally retiring at age 65 and moving to Oceanside, California. Roland Martin spent all his life on and involved in the lakes, a career that ultimately spanned 54 years. Most uniquely, he captained car ferries with direct connections to where he grew up and lived, the Grand Haven and the City of Milwaukee, sailing them to and from both cities. He is also the only sailor discovered to have served on both car ferries carrying the namesake Milwaukee. Both Roland Martin and his late captain father Edward Martin, over the years, appeared in many news reports and articles, including feature articles. While many other Bayview lake captains were similarly reported on extensively, these are the only known in-depth personal feature news interviews involving Bayview father and son lake captains. In one interview, long after he retired, Captain Martin stated about his father, quote, "I became a sailor because of the influence of my father. He was the greatest sailor who ever lived." Unquote. There is a previous episode on this channel about Bayview Lake Captain Edward Martin. Roland Martin also liked to paint. He once painted a picture of the SS City of Milwaukee while he was captain, as a gift to his chief engineer, who posted it in his quarters. Finally, the ship that Captain Roland Martin captained the longest during his career, the car ferry SS City of Milwaukee for 18 years from 1938 to 1956, while living in Bayview, is now perfectly preserved as a museum ship in Manistee, Michigan. It is the only ship remaining that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case by at least 2 and probably 3. Besides Roland Martin's 18 years as its captain, it was also captained by Bayview Lake Captain Ottmar Janke from 1960 to 1964, and likely Bayview Captain Albert Neumeyer, though the duration of his time aboard as captain is unknown. Together, these 3 Bayview Lake captains commanded it for a total of at least 25 years, or a quarter of a century, and likely longer. A search for a complete list of all the ship's captains was not successful. However, it's highly likely Bayview's 3 lake captains captained it more years combined than all of the others, making the SS City of Milwaukee truly a Bayview namesake ship. Today, the ship is open for tours and operated also as a bed and breakfast. It contains all its original woodwork and solid brass period fixtures, a true time capsule of Great Lakes sailing. The captain's quarters, where these 3 Bayview Lake captains lived during their time aboard, are also preserved in their original condition. It's a perfect 3-day weekend for any Bayview resident interested in experiencing a first-hand connection to Bayview's substantial maritime history. As for Captain Martin's family life, that began for him at age 21, on 12th May 1924, when he married wife Viola Bavry, aged 20, in Grand Haven, Michigan. Like him, Viola also grew up in Grand Haven. Upon their marriage, his occupation was listed as sailor and hers as teacher. They had 5 children, 3 boys, Gordon, Ronald and Roland, and 2 girls, Beverly and Kathleen. They were married for 60 years. On 7th September 1988, Viola died. She was 84. Then, 6 years later, on 18th October 1994, Captain Roland J. Martin died, age 89. They are buried together, most fittingly, in what was always their home of Grand Haven, Michigan, at Lake Forest Cemetery. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. If you'd like to read more details about Captain Roland J. Martin, as well as the sources for the information contained in today's video, you can find these and more in the book Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, for sale now, by individual volumes on both Amazon.com and HenschelHouseBooks.com. All proceeds from book sales go to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to contribute to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider contributing to us through the listings found on our website under the Contribute button, as well as in the end credits at the conclusion of this video. Note, we are not a 501c3, so contributions are not tax-deductible. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. This is the only surviving intact ship that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case was captained by at least 2, and likely 3, totaling over 20 years between them. Finally, we also have free self-guided walking tours of Bayview's 71 lake captains' homes, using only your phone. It's simple and easy. Just go to our website shown here, find the item on the menu bar at the upper left named Free Self-Guided Walking Tours, and then scroll down to find the map with the instructions. Zoom in by street. When you find a captain's house you're interested in, click on it and details appear on the right, along with a link to the YouTube episode from this channel that provides the biography of the captain that lived there. It's free, fun, and available any time you're out walking. Just bring along your phone. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.